Welcome to the What's Happening Birmingham video podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Jarvis Escott with What's Happening Birmingham. This is I want to call it my last installment of my series with the good folks at the Levitt Jewish Community Center. But I think this is a special sit-down conversation. I like to call him my friend after I've gotten to know him, and we had a great conversation about a month ago. So if anybody hasn't been watching the previous two, part one, part two, back when October 7th happened, if you was like me, and many people who watched it on TV, you was just shocked, and it was just tragic what was going on in Israel. So, usually when I hear about what's going on in the Middle East, I'm not saying that I don't pay as much attention to it, but when this particularly happened, and I would like to say, in my version, the brutality of what happened with it and the senseless violence, it caused me to kind of delve a little bit deeper into it. So one night I was with a friend, my good Jewish friend, I like to call her Stacy Osborne. I hope she loved the shout out I just gave her. And I was telling her, like, man, I'm telling her about my podcast, and I really want to know more about the subject. So she said, I know a great friend that's at the Levitt Jewish Community Center, and his name is Richard Friedman, and I want to connect you guys together. So probably about a week or two later, me and him met up, and I probably say, and you agree, Richard, it was one of the best conversations I've had with somebody I feel like I've known you for years.
Absolutely.
And everything. So I wanted to kind of, not in my way, recreate the conversation, but I wanted to bring him on today. And as you all know, the previous two episodes, I wanted to bring people on to kind of talk about this topic. But my goal was, I'm not trying to change your opinions or your hearts or mind, but I want to bring an expert on to give you, and I like to say, accurate information and an expert on this topic. So Richard, this man has several titles and great bio. He is the former executive director of the Birmingham Jewish Federation. And who better to bring on than I like to call my good friend Richard. So Richard, I hope I gave you a great introduction.
Brief intro?
Yeah, a great intro, but I'll let you do your intro now.
Well, as you said, I'm the retired executive director of the Birmingham Jewish Federation. I had the honor of having that position for a very long time, 37 years. I retired 4 years ago. Since that time, I've been doing a number of things, but particularly since October 7th, I have gone back to work for our Jewish community as a volunteer, doing a lot of speaking and educating and programs such as this one. I also have a parallel career in journalism. In my younger days, I was a reporter and editor at the Birmingham News. I was the City Hall reporter and the Metro editor. Throughout my career, I've written extensively for a number of publications. And more recently, in my semi-retirement, I'm associate editor of a magazine that's based here, Southern Jewish Life. So my two careers have been in Jewish Federation community work and journalism.
Okay. And as you all see, he has a great bio. And a little fun fact about Richard, he's an Alabama fan.
You bet. Roll Tide. Sorry to all you Auburn fans, but full disclosure.
Yes. So that's just, I guess, the first question I want to ask you. And I guess follow up after that. What happened on October the 7th?
Well, it's very simple. A murderous terrorist group, Hamas, invaded Israel and attacked civilians, went on a rampage of murdering, beheading, raping, kidnapping, burning of people until the Israeli army could respond. It was caught off guard, could respond and stop it. We hear that Hamas killed 1,200 people on October 7th. Well, I always say that's not fully accurate.
Okay.
What we need to say is Hamas was stopped after killing 1,200 people on October 7th, because if they were allowed to continue, they would have killed 12,000 people. And if they were allowed to go beyond that, they would have killed 120,000 people, because the objective is to destroy the state of Israel and kill every Jew. Now, I have seen the footage that comes mainly from footage that Hamas took with their cameras and posted on Facebook as they celebrated this massacre. And Jarvis, it is among the most horrific things that you could possibly imagine. They run the gamut from seeing someone literally beheaded as people cheer with joy, to women being raped and abused, to parents being shot in front of their children, to children being shot in front of their parents. So this is a savage, murderous, bloodthirsty terrorist group that invaded Israel, putting Israel in a position, as it would be for any other country, that it has to respond. And in particular, because the Hamas leadership has said it intends to do this, if given the chance, again and again and again. So that's what happened on October 7th. And since then, there have been a number of developments, as you well know.
So I guess after, of course, like one of the things, the early reports I saw was almost like they flew from the sky.
Yes.
And
this attack had been planned for years. And it was multifaceted, from the air, the sea, certainly the land. Hamas did a number of things to throw the Israeli security forces off guard. It was the Sabbath in Israel, which is a slower day. It was also a Jewish holiday in Israel. And the military was lightly staffed, and it was a horrible confluence of opportunities that had been planned for years, and we're still feeling the aftershock.
So the response after this happened, of course, the military went after Hamas. And like I told you all from the beginning of this interview, I wanted to bring somebody on because, like, you know, since this situation's been going on, there's been different reports, you know, some pro-Israel, some pro-Palestine, but depending on what you read or what you watch, how do you know what is true and what is accurate?
Sure.
And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead, sir.
Oh yeah, and the response, I wanted to bring you on, I guess, to kind of talk about it, because this is just me watching. At first, it went from people talking about the attack that happened. Now it's like, and I guess this is my personal opinion, people have almost forgot about what happened on October 7th and only happened on what's the aftermath or what they see on TV.
Well, you know, that's a reflection of the world we live in, where our collective attention span is short because events move so quickly, and they are moved so quickly because of the technology of media. And it can also be frustrating because then we forget things. We forget so quickly what happened. You know, here's the way, when I'm asked, that I frame what is going on right now. And at its core, it's very simple. As I just said, Israel was brutally attacked by Hamas, a terrorist organization which would have killed 12,000, 100,000 if they had had the opportunity. Hamas has said, we will try to do this again and again and again. Israel has to respond. One of Hamas's techniques is they plant their fighters and their rockets and their missiles and their installations in civilian population centers, schools, mosques, playgrounds, hospitals, which then makes it tortuous for the Israelis to seek out the enemy who is hiding itself behind human shields and in tunnels underneath those very facilities. So, invariably, there are going to be civilian casualties because of the way Hamas deploys itself and using these people as human shields. And those civilian casualties are a tragedy. Regardless of one's point of view on this conflict, I don't think we can be immune to the civilian suffering in Gaza any more than we could be immune to the horrific acts of violence perpetrated against the Israelis on October 7th. The challenge is, as events move so quickly and we forget about October 7th, is remembering a couple of core things. Number one, this is a Hamas-induced war. Number two, Israel has no choice but to respond. Number three, the only way Israel has a chance of conquering the enemy is to do the kind of urban fighting it's doing right now because of the enemy hiding itself in these installations and behind human shields. But the most important things, I think, are these. And again, I don't want to be insensitive, and I want to acknowledge it's no matter what I think, these people who've lost their lives, it's all tragic. But the reality is there's only one party to blame, and that's Hamas, because Hamas started this and the way in which Hamas is conducting it, and Hamas has the power to end it simply by surrendering, laying down its arms, agreeing with the dismantling of these rockets and tunnels and the deportation of its leaders to faraway countries. So one of the struggles I face, as I like to think a caring person with a human heart, in the Jewish faith, the thing we value the most is life. I also know that's true in the Christian faith, and I'm not suggesting it's not true in other faiths. So balancing the agony of civilian casualties with the recognition that there become points in time when genuine evil has to be destroyed simply for the survival of, in this case, the survival of people and Israel, and there are other cases throughout history, which I could go into. It's the most agonizing of dilemmas. And I hope it's over soon. And it, as I say, can end tomorrow if Hamas decided to end it.
So when you watch on TV and certain forms of media accuse Israel of genocide, some war crimes, when you see that, what's your reaction, knowing what you know?
Well, I have two reactions to that. The first is that's very, very painful on a personal level, because the Jewish people, of all people, know the term genocide. We were the victims of a massive, unprecedented genocide when the Nazis murdered 6 million of our people. In that 6 million were a large number of members of my extended family who, unlike my grandparents, stayed in Poland and were murdered by the Nazis. So to hurl that term genocide at someone Jewish and someone Israeli is very, very piercing. And painfully emotional to hear someone suggest or accuse you of genocide. So that's an emotional reaction.
Mm-hmm.
On the practical side, it's illogical. It makes no sense because if the Israelis were interested in committing genocide, which is the wiping out of a population, as one Israeli leader said, if that were our goal, we could have done that in 30 days. He said, it's ludicrous to suggest that. We're making every effort in a very complex urban war environment to alert the population, the civilian population, where the safe areas are, to give advance warning, which no army in human history has ever done this, to give advance warning of where the next attack is coming and to try to move the population out of that area. So it's an inversion, it's a distortion, and the reality of it is, you know, not to minimize it, but I become dubious over name calling. That name calling also suggests the people really don't have facts or they don't fully understand the facts. Because, last point here on genocide, there's only one party in this conflict that's striving to commit genocide, and I'll explain why. And that's Hamas. Because in its charter, it calls for the liquidation of the world's only majority Jewish state and the destruction and death of every Jew. And number two, if you think about, you go back to October 7th, that was genocide. It was stopped. But the number, as I say, could have easily been 12,000 or 120,000, or if they had the armaments and Iran came into it with nuclear capability, it could have been 100, could have been 1.2 million. That's what the intent of Hamas was. And then last point on this, when you talk about genocide, you know, almost every day throughout this conflict, certainly several times a week, certainly at the beginning before Israel went into Gaza and was able to begin dismantling these installations that would fire rockets. Thousands and thousands of deadly rockets were being fired into Israel, aimed at civilians, aimed at schools, aimed at playgrounds, aimed at synagogues, aimed at communities, trying to kill as many people as possible. And that, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you dress it up, that is genocidal intent.
Yeah, and then there's the reports of, and there's another thing too, I read and hear reports every day. I want two things, I guess, top of my head, because like I said, me and him had a great 2-hour conversation about this previously, so I'm almost trying to remember everything we talked about. I want to go, before I talk about what's your thoughts on a possible ceasefire, I want to talk about the hostages. According to media reports, it was about 150 hostages, or was it 200 hostages? What was the?
I think the number today is approximately 140. It was higher, and hostages have been released.
So with those hostages, that I remember seeing reports on various networks that they was kind of, when they finally got free, they was brainwashed into saying that, like, Hamas treated them like they was, I mean, what they call it, I wouldn't say prisoners of war, but they wasn't tortured. They wasn't tortured or abused or anything like that.
Yeah, well, we know there's psychological warfare going on.
Yeah.
We know that these hostages who are on these videos are under extreme duress. We know that they've been psychologically damaged because of being kidnapped and being held in captivity for so long, and we don't know what's been done to them. We also know or can imagine the fear that is coursing through their mind about the consequences if they were to say, quote, the wrong thing, end quote. And one would think all they want to do is conduct themselves in a way that could enhance the chances of them being released. So I think nobody with an ounce of common sense would take at face value what they see in these hostage videos. Because again, Jarvis, you just got to apply logic to this, because an enemy, Hamas, that burns people, beheads them, rapes them, does horrific sexually violent things that I won't describe on this podcast, but are almost beyond the imagination. All of a sudden they become, lovely people who have extended hospitality to you for 50, 60, 70, 80 days. It makes no sense. And one of the things, so my background's in journalism, my background's in Jewish communal work. I've been to Israel 55 times. I've talked to Palestinians, I've talked to Muslims, I've read extensively. And sometimes, as dreadfully serious as all these issues are, I just sit back and shake my head and smile, because people reach such illogical conclusions that I shake my head and I say, don't these people even take a breath to think about what they're saying? Because oftentimes what they're saying makes no sense.
So when you see things like now in the media, the biggest thing everybody's pushing for is ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. Do you even think that's possible?
Well, we have to talk about what does ceasefire mean? Okay. You hear that term a lot. What does it mean? There was a ceasefire in place on October 6th that Hamas broke. Okay. So now we say ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. Does that mean that Israel should stop its military offensive and leave in place an enemy that is supported by Iran to commit these kinds of atrocities again and again and again? No one thinking logically would ever suggest that. If it were your homeland, your neighborhood, your city, your family at stake, would you agree to that? Absolutely not. The predicament Israel faces is, as a country and a people, that again, the highest value in Judaism is life, is the life of those hostages. And Hamas knows that. That's their leader, that's their bargaining chip. So you've seen the pauses in fighting tied to release of hostages. You constantly hear reports that there may be another one, but there hasn't yet been. And number one, to suggest a ceasefire without the release of all hostages and to allow Hamas to stay in place and rebuild itself and do this again makes absolutely no sense. You see, one of the challenges is that we, like I said to you when we had coffee at Panera at the summit, right? Lovely setting, beautiful area. We sat for 2 hours and it went by too quickly.
Yeah.
Could have talked for 4 hours. The whole time we sat there, we did not have a single security worry. We did not worry about rockets coming through that roof and killing us. We did not worry about terrorists walking into that restaurant and murdering us, kidnapping us, beheading us, okay? So what happens for us Westerners, we live in a world that is vastly different than the one that the Israelis live in. We live in a world where we do a very good job of developing Western approaches and Western solutions to a Middle East conflict. Example, one of the core principles that guide our lives as Westerners here in the United States, that disputes are to be settled through peaceful negotiation, reconciliation, through the judicial process. That's the way disputes, arguments, disagreements are supposed to be settled. Okay, despite too many horrible examples in the United States, the prevailing culture and the prevailing ethic is still defined by nonviolence. If I have a disagreement with you, I don't shoot you, okay? We try to work it out, doesn't work out, we go to court, each make our case, we accept the court settlement, and that's it, okay? The Middle East is very different. Israel is dealing with an enemy for whom those rules don't apply. This is a Middle Eastern conflict where, at the end of the day, the stronger party is the one that prevails. So the idea of a ceasefire, where two parties logically negotiated, agree to stop fighting, which I said Hamas broke the previous ceasefire on October 7th, doesn't have a lot of logic to it. It's a wonderful idea, just doesn't have a lot of logic to it. So that's my thought. But lastly, I'll say this. People ask me all the time, well, should Israel do this? Should Israel do that? Okay, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? And I say, look, I'm in favor of whatever Israel and the Palestinians agree to. Okay, I don't live there. I'm not going to absorb the consequences if the deal goes bad. So who am I to suggest here in lovely Birmingham, Alabama, what Israel should do or shouldn't do when it comes to security issues? I'm in favor. I'm in favor of those things that the Israelis and the Palestinians agree to. That's my position on these issues.
Okay, and that's a good segue, which leads me to one of the things I hear about in the news a lot, that even the United States as a diplomacy when it comes to dealing with Middle East or achieving, like they call peace in the Middle East, is this word called, well, a couple words, two-state solution. Can you tell the audience, when people say that term, what does that mean? And in your opinion, do you think that's even possible?
Yeah.
In light of what happened with October the 7th now?
Sure. So what is called the two-state solution, I'm going to try to give a snapshot analysis and a quick history.
Okay.
I want to say to your listeners, I've been at this a long time, speaking to groups, writing, taking questions, and I welcome anyone out there to go ahead and look up independently anything that I've said if you wish to verify it or validate it. Go to a credible mainstream source and look it up. And as a journalist, I think it's very, very important to speak the language of facts. And that's what I strive to do. So the two-state solution, a very quick history, has its seeds in 1947.
Okay.
In 1947, there were two populations in that land. And the British, in the wake of World War II, had gained control of that area. And there was an Arab population living in that area that had developed there over the centuries. And there was a growing Jewish population in that area as well, made up of Jews who had lived in that same land since biblical times, along with Jews who were immigrating to that land. So you had two populations which began to compete for the same piece of land. Okay. And that land had been known by a number of names throughout history. It was known as the name Canaan. It was known as Judea. It was known as Israel. Later, it was the Romans who named it Palestine, and it had gone through a whole series of evolution that bring us to 1947. So in 1947, the United Nations, the British said, we're leaving, and they turned the problem over to the United Nations. And the United Nations said, okay, we've got to work out some kind of compromise here. So they divided the land between the Jewish population and the Arab population. And that plan became known as the partition plan. They partitioned that land. And they said, look, the Arab community that exists will get part of it. The Jewish community that exists will get part of it. And the vision is to create two states. So the Jewish community said, we will accept that. We will accept that compromise. The Arab communities and the Arab countries surrounding it rejected it, and launched a war against Israel. 5 Arab armies against Israel, which at the time only had 600,000 people, and launched a war promising to destroy the new state of Israel. And there's a famous quote that they will push the Jews into the sea. And that, of course, did not happen. Israel achieved its independence and became a sovereign, independent state. But that was the first time the two-state solution was tried, and it was rejected. History continues to unfold. Similar thing in 1967. In what is known as the Six-Day War, Israel gained control of expanded territory and said to the Arabs, look, here we are now, let's sit down and negotiate. And the Arabs, in a very famous conference, said what is known as the 3 no's: no recognition, no negotiation, no peace.
Oh, wow.
They rejected that. The pattern continues. Fast forward, because you may remember this, your listeners may remember this. In the year 2000, which is already 24 years ago, but if you remember, President Clinton met at Camp David with the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat. And Barak offered Arafat 97% of what the Palestinians were seeking and said, let's negotiate the other 3%. We can exchange land. We can figure this out. Arafat and the Palestinian leadership rejected it and launched a war of suicide bombings against the people of Israel that lasted 3 years and killed over 1,000 Israelis. Tried again in 2009. So you get the gist of this. So what then are the prospects for a two-state solution? I think it's a Western approach to a Middle Eastern problem. What I do think is it's hard to envision it happening right now, because we know this phrase, timing is everything. The Israelis are not in a frame of mind to create another independent Arab state in its lap, particularly given the radicalism in those territories. Hamas has said, we will never agree to that. So it's kind of ruled out on that end. And it's a problem. Like I said a few minutes ago, people say, well, what do you think? What do you think? I've been to those territories. As I said, I've been to Israel 55 times. I've met with Palestinians in these areas. I'm in favor of whatever Israel and the Palestinians agree to. But I do believe one of the reasons the two-state solution continues to fall flat is because it's a Western approach to a Middle East problem that doesn't really understand the problem. So I want to end this answer in a minute by saying what I think the problem is.
Okay.
If you really study the history, not just back to 1948, you can go back to 1928, you can go back to 1900 if you really understand all this. What I believe, the crux of the matter, the problem is the refusal of the Arabs. Now, not all the Arabs, because Israel does have peace with Egypt. Israel does have peace with Jordan. Israel does have normalization and peace through the Abraham Accords. But what I'm talking about is, I guess now what we would call the Palestinian community and its leaders.
Mm-hmm.
The crux of the matter is the refusal to accept a Jewish state on 1 inch of the biblical homeland of the Jewish people. That's the crux of the matter. If that ever changed, then I believe everything else could be worked out. And that's a frustration, that's a sadness, and maybe one day that will change.
Okay, and that, I'm glad we kind of ended it that way, because one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, and this topic has always fascinated me, of course, what goes on with Israel, but also the topic of anti-Semitism. That is, for some reason, it's always been there, but today in our lifetime, it's reared its ugly head that I can't believe in 2024 there's people out here that believe the Holocaust never happened, which it happened to everybody. But people, whether they twist it by people's lies or what they believe in, carries this notion of anti-Semitism, hatred towards Jews. And I want to start off, like when I first sat down with you, I was just kind of telling you my life and how I grew up. And when it came to the topic of the Jewish people or Israel, me, African American, grew up in church believing a couple things. One, Israel was God's chosen people. Two, there will always be conflict in the Middle East until Jesus comes back and solves all of that with Armageddon or whatever. And last but not least, that there's these myths about the Jewish people and unfair stereotypes. And we live in an era now, especially in social media, that people cling on to like terms. Like, for example, what you mentioned earlier about the term I heard lately with this conflict is, I'll throw out a couple terms. Free Palestine, from the river to the sea. And you see people doing hashtags for that, or Zionism. And I wanted to bring somebody on to actually explain that, because I feel like a lot of times when people say certain terms like this in this day and era, they don't really know, one, what they're talking about, and two, how dangerous those actual terms and words are.
So let's go through
Okay.
all the things you just touched upon.
Okay.
It's very important and very good insights. And I'll say to your listeners, so you see why we sat there for 2 hours.
No.
We could have sat there for 4 hours on that lovely morning that we were drinking coffee. Let me think about where to begin. So let's talk a little bit about anti-Semitism.
Mm.
Anti-Semitism is kind of a big word and a little bit of a strange word, particularly if you go into the origin of the word. But what it refers to is hostility and hatred toward Jews, and now in the era in which we live, not only toward Jews, but toward Israel, which is the world's only majority Jewish state. Okay. And we're living at a time where we're seeing an acute explosion of anti-Semitism. The hatred and hostility toward Jews accelerates almost daily. One of the things I tell people, you can do this yourselves if you're interested, is Google the word Jewish, and then you get different choices what to do next. And then you click on to news, and it gives you a Jewish news feed or news coverage relating to Jews that took place in the previous 24 hours, 48 hours. And invariably, you will find at least one story about some kind of anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish incident in the United States. So it's just growing and growing and growing. Now, people say to me, well, where does all this come from? How's this happening? What's this about? And I say a couple of things. I said, if you have tracked this issue, and most people don't. I did. That was part of my job, and now it's part of my continuing interest. If you have tracked that issue over a 15 to 20 year arc, you can see that it has been steadily ticking upward. And October 7th and its aftermath did not cause anti-Semitism. It catalyzed anti-Semitism. It energized it. It took it up to what is now a radioactive level. So where does this anti-Semitism come from? How does it come about? I believe it comes from three sources. A triangle, if you will. Number one is growing hostility and hatred toward Jews on the far right. Now, I'm not talking about conservatives. I'm talking about extremists, supremacists, right-wing groups that specialize in merchandising, particularly on the internet, conspiracy theories about Jews.
Blaming the alt-right type
the alt-right, blaming Jews for every ill confronting society, from COVID, that the Jews caused COVID, from
Great replacement theory. That's another one I see.
That's what I'm going to get to. Exactly, took the words I'm out from great replacement theory. Now, I want you to understand what that's about. If you remember, a few years back, there was this terrible, startling demonstration by the alt-right in Charlottesville, Virginia, where they were marching with torches. And they were shouting, "Jews will not replace us." Now, that has its seeds in Nazi Germany. And it's a reference to a belief that there's a conspiracy, that Jews are behind a plot to replace white people in this country who hold positions of influence with Black and brown people. Okay, they see Jews as manipulating society so that brown and Black people will replace white people. Therefore, Jews will not replace us. There are other uses and manifestations of that phrase, but that's a key one. So that's one point on the triangle. The other second point on the triangle is what I'll call the far left. I'm not talking about liberals. I'm not even talking about progressives. I'm talking about far left, where they ascribe every ill in the world, not to the Jewish people, but to the Jewish state, meaning Israel. that it's Israel that has caused this problem, that it's Israel that controls the US Congress, which is ridiculous, that it's Israel that is a colonial supremacist, occupying oppressor. And everything they read into Israel as the entity to be blamed for the world's ills. And then there's a third point on the triangle, and that is radical Islamic extremism. Now, I'm not talking about Islam in general. I'm not talking about all Muslims. What I am talking about is those who claim to be Muslim and who have embraced an extremist theology which motivates them to commit the kinds of heinous acts that we in the West are all too familiar with, and that motivates groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, all of which are fomented by the greatest exporter of Islamic extremism the world has ever known, and that is Iran. So you have this triangle, and that's kind of the tripod under the anti-Semitism. And it's a challenge. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about relationships between African American community and the Jewish community, civil rights era and beyond, and also some of the Christian traditions that you alluded to, being taught that the land has promised to the Jewish people, the expectation of conflict, and it will only be resolved with the second coming of Jesus. So let me speak to that. So as someone Jewish, that is not our theology, but nonetheless, I respect that Christian theology because it's very meaningful to Christians. That's their belief. And I'm a huge believer. I come out of a journalism background. In speech, free expression, freedom of religion, the marketplace of ideas. And when I think about faith and religion, I never subscribe to the idea that one religion is right, another one is wrong. I don't believe in that. I think it's a very big God who has lots of pathways, and feel comforted when people can embark on a faith journey that leads them to lead a more holy life and do all they can to improve the condition of humankind. So the point being, yes, that is a dominant thread in Christian theology. And that's a reason, not the only reason, but that's a reason as to why the Christian community, certainly believing Christians, certainly biblically inspired Christians, are so supportive of Israel. And as a Jewish person, we welcome that friendship, embrace that friendship, and celebrate that friendship. Because while there are differences in our tradition in some aspects, we have much in common. And of course, Christianity grew out of Judaism. So we're kind of joined at the hip and always will be. I want to talk about the Black-Jewish relationship.
Well, I want to ask you this while this was on my head. I'm going to go with that, is that one of the biggest unfair stereotypes I personally believe, and like my conversation I had today, is this conspiracy theory that the Jewish people control all the money.
Okay.
Where in the world did that come from?
I'll speak to that in a minute. I want to jot a note so we come back to it because I want to talk about the Black-Jewish relationship, both in civil rights era and now. But I want to get to what you just said. So this idea that all Jews are rich and Jewish money controls everything, right? Okay. So I said earlier, sometimes I can only shake my head and laugh because you say, don't people have a brain? Don't they even think logically about anything? So let's talk about all Jews are rich. Okay, let's start there. It's very interesting. I've heard that my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you, and I'll give you some illustration, and then we'll talk about how that came about. I can tell you that that is not the case. All Jews are not rich. Now, how do I know that? Well, I know it because I was executive director of the Birmingham Jewish Federation for 37 years. And one of the primary things we did was raise money to assist needy Jews right here in our community, in our state, and in our country. We would help provide food, housing, transportation, vocational assistance, income supplements. And the reason people are not aware of that, they don't see Jewish poverty, is because, I say this with pride, we take care of our own. We built an incredible network of organizations led by Jewish federations. There are about 155 Jewish federations in North America. And one of its primary missions is to take care of the needy and indigent within our own community. But be assured, there are Jews in Birmingham who, if it were not with the assistance of the Birmingham Jewish Federation, would be living at or below the poverty level. So it's not true. Now, let me enlarge upon it to speak to something that Jarvis and I talked about, which I think is very important. So not all Jews are rich. There are a significant number of Jews who have prospered in America. And I'm really proud of that. And when we think about that, we have to say, well, how did that happen? How did Jews prosper in America? And I could tell you story after story after story after story after story, but I'll tell you my own family story. Okay? My grandfather came here in 1910 with nothing. My wife's grandfather came here in the early part of the 1900s with, I think, $2 in his pocket.
Oh, wow.
My grandfather went to work as a laborer in a textile mill. And what he did was work really, really hard. And eventually he would get promotions. And eventually he got to the point where he had enough money where he was willing to take the risk to start his own business. My grandfather was a perfect example of what we call the American dream. He started his own business. He had 3 children. One of them went on to college, my father, who was then able to have his own business. And we were not rich, but we were not poor. And it was all because my grandfather came here legally, immigrated to the US from Poland, which is a good thing because he would have been otherwise killed, and played by the rules, built a family on family values, and embraced the American dream. The same story can be told about my wife's grandfather. An immigrant from Europe, came here with nothing, worked hard, lived, a meager existence, and eventually was able to accrue enough startup knowledge where he could borrow money to begin a business. And Jews of that generation, our grandfathers and even our fathers, by and large, were entrepreneurs. So those entrepreneurs, in addition to creating lots and lots and lots of jobs for other people, they played by the rules, worked hard, remained, created strong family values, sacrificed for the next generation could get an education. And to me, Jewish success is one of the ultimate examples, one of the ultimate celebrations of the American dream. So I'm really proud that I've been able to enjoy, again, we're not rich, we're not poor, but enjoy a quality of life where I could then provide my children with educational opportunities so they could then build successful lives and prosper economically. So that's something that I think for Jews and any American, anyone who believes in the American dream, anyone who believes in strong religious values, anyone who believes in strong family values, anyone who believes in the ethic of working hard should be celebrating Jewish success in America. We're not the only group. There are other stories, okay? But I celebrate the fact that Jews have achieved a significant level of prosperity in the United States. I think the United States has been very good for Jewish people, and I think Jewish people have been very good for the United States. When you look around here in Birmingham, for example.
Yeah, I want you to tie into that, yeah.
And see the role that the Jewish community, going back to the very founding of the city, when it was Jewish bankers, the Steiner brothers, who saved the city from bankruptcy, the role that Birmingham's small Jewish community, tell you how small it is. There are only today about 6,000 Jews in Birmingham, which is just 0.5% of the metro area. And you look at the achievements, the role the Jewish community has played in the business community, the role the Jewish community has played in the civic community, the role the Jewish community has played in the philanthropic community, the role the Jewish community has played in the business community, always giving of its resources. The top givers to United Way, disproportionately in terms of our small population, are the largest proportion per capita are Jewish. You look at the buildings, the names on buildings at some of our universities, UAB, for example.
Yeah, the School of Business.
Okay, the Collat family, okay? I know them very, very well, and I could spend 2 hours, which we don't have, highlighting the contributions they have made to Birmingham and the state of Alabama to benefit life for everyone, and their other families as well. So I want to talk now, Jarvis, about the Black-Jewish relationship, 60s and now. So can I move into that?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So relations between the Jewish community and the Black community, I think, have always been important, and I know they're especially important to the Jewish community. And there were moments and sagas during the civil rights movement, both locally, regionally, and nationally, where it was prominent Jews who stepped forward at great personal risk and aligned themselves visibly with the Black leadership in their efforts to secure the rights to which Black Americans were entitled. And I could tell you story after story after story. That's something I'm really proud of. Today, that relationship continues to maintain an importance and a priority. Let me give you a couple of quick examples that I'm really proud of. So Jarvis did a wonderful podcast tour of our Jewish Community Center with our director the other day. And he saw with his own eyes that the Jewish Community Center is open to everybody of all faiths and races. And it was among the first, if not the first, such facility to welcome Black members in the 1960s. We did not mention that to you, but that's a historical fact that the Jewish Community Center is very proud of. Today, we have programs where a significant number of people who benefit from those programs are African American. For example, you heard our director, Brooke Bowles, talk about free swim lessons for Birmingham City kids. And that is because one of the things we are taught in our Torah, which is our sacred text, and in Jewish tradition, is the importance of teaching people to swim because it can save their lives. You walk through our preschool, you'll see African American kids, and those are things that I'm really, really proud of. But there's something in particular, Jarvis, you may not even know this, that I'm really, really proud of.
Okay.
And I'll take some credit because I was one of the architects.
All right.
And I also have this background in journalism. And one of the things I do is I work as associate editor for Southern Jewish Life magazine. And we've developed a wonderful relationship and friendship with the Birmingham Times, which highlights our city's Black community, as you well know. And the editor of the Birmingham Times, Barnett Wright, myself, and the editor of Southern Jewish Life, Larry Brooke, we created a partnership which we think is terrific. It's a joint internship, a joint journalism internship between the two publications and Miles College, where a student from Miles College works simultaneously for both newspapers, aspiring journalists and aspiring communications major, to benefit from what we think is a first-class journalism internship and write stories of mutual interest to both the Black and Jewish communities. It's a great program. It's achieved national recognition. We did the first year, and we're getting ready to start the second year. And just, to me, the most gratifying thing is the way it impacted on our first intern's life. I just ran into her the other day. She was telling me that that single educational experience changed her life, and we're about to do it again. And that's just a reflection, I think, of the commitment we're talking about. So I'm not here to tell you that all 6,000 Jews in Birmingham are perfect and are necessarily have, open-mindedness towards all kind of people. I don't think there's a single one of us on this call who could get on this call and say that of their own community. What I am proud of is there's a continuing effort in the Jewish community to not only reach out to all communities in Birmingham, but in particular the Black community, both because of the shared history, and I think we can relate to each other in ways. We both share a historic experience of tragic magnitude, obviously slavery and the Holocaust. And we've each had struggles. Those struggles are not identical, but nonetheless, we're two people who have struggled. And I think that there's a common bond there that should never be forgotten and should always be tended to. So that's what I wanted to say about that issue.
One of the biggest things, like before we start taping this, like I tell you, I was going back reading on the history of everything, is that I'm so afraid they don't teach that now in school. Like, for me doing my research, I read some things. I was like, the name of buildings in Birmingham, or that when they had bombed 16th Street Baptist Church, they also was trying to bomb a synagogue.
Right. Exactly.
And that's the type of stuff is like, why is that not in Alabama history? Why that's not, because I feel like when people know about these things, when you hear about things that's going on today, they have a different perspective, a different take, a different opinion.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. my kids have long been out of the school system, and my grandkids are just entering it. And I am not as connected to the school system and the public school system as I once was as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
What I do know is it sadly has become one of the new and more toxic political battlegrounds in America. And I worry that the essence of what education is supposed to be about, the public school level, the high school level, the university level, is becoming eroded and corroded. And it's forcing everyone to just dig in their heels and cling to what they're most familiar with, what they're most comfortable with. And it works against the true purpose of education, which is listening and learning and opening yourself up to hearing other perspectives and other ideas. The core of what you're saying is excellent. You know, I think one of the greatest things is Black History Month. I think that, Black History Month, I think, has achieved a certain prominence that makes it, certainly over the years, have made me much more aware, much more attuned to the importance of knowing Black history and understanding that Black history is not a separate category of history. It is, but it's not, because it's American history,
Mm-hmm.
and it's integral to American history. And that I think any educational experience that doesn't, that minimizes or marginalizes Black history is deficient. And I suspect, just picking up on what you're suggesting, we don't do enough of that with other histories as well. In this case, your reference to the role that the Jewish community historically has played in this city's evolution. So I think it's a great point.
Yeah, and then also too, like when I sat down with you that day, and I just asked you like the question, of course, like what another theory people have: why do all the Jews stay in Mountain Brook? And you gave me the history of how that came to be.
Okay, so the first part of it was
The history of
okay.
why the
Why
majority
Jew?
of Jewish
Why
community.
there's this perception
Yeah,
all Jews live
yeah,
in Mountain Brook? Okay, number one, they don't.
okay.
They don't. My son, for example, lives in Homewood. Uh, I would guess, it's just a very rough guess, that 50% of the Jews in the metro Birmingham area do not live in Mountain Brook. Okay.
Mm,
So let's say that maybe 1 out of every 2 families does. So my wife is from here. I'm not. She grew up in Mountain Brook.
okay.
Now, one of the reasons Jews migrated to Mountain Brook is because they were shunned by other communities. That I don't know, and I don't want to misstate here,
Okay.
but whether it was by practice or by covenant, Jews were barred from living in Vestavia. Not today, but there was a time. And other communities, Jews were barred from joining country clubs. And Mountain Brook, for whatever reason, was a place where Jews could live, though what sprung up was sort of Jewish areas of Mountain Brook.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one reason. There's a historical context, and Jews like to live among Jews, not exclusively. You can't do that in Birmingham, Alabama, where we're so few, but any group, I think, likes to live among its people, not to the exclusion of other people,
Yeah.
but you don't want to be the only Jewish family on your block. You You don't want to be the only Jewish family in your neighborhood. I suspect you don't want to be the only Catholic family. You don't want to be the only Italian family. You don't want to be the only Black family. You don't want to be the only Asian family. So I think that's a factor number one. Number two, and there's no need, you're not asking me to, but there's no need to apologize for this, particularly going back to the fact that I said I think Jews should celebrate their prosperity because it's a reflection of the American dream. Jews have prospered in Birmingham and have attained a certain economic level where many, not all, can choose to live in what they might see as the nicer neighborhoods, just good schools, beautiful neighborhoods, etc. But Jarvis, things change. Things change.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the reasons my son and his wife chose to live in Homewood is because, and my son grew up in Mountain Brook and went through the Mountain Brook school system, is because they wanted greater diversity.
Okay.
That Mountain Brook is almost exclusively white. And I think people, certainly of his generation, have begun to rethink that maybe I don't want to live in an area that is so homogeneous, where it's white, a lot of people are financially comfortable. On a more diverse environment for myself and my children. And I see big changes evolving. I've often thought, if I were starting out today, would I choose to live in Mountain Brook? And the answer is possibly not, because I now recognize that I live in an area where there is not much diversity. And how maybe a different kind of experience could have further benefited my kids, though they both went to colleges where there was a substantial amount of diversity. So that's just part of continued evolution. The history of Mountain Brook, as I say, it started, Jews actually began, they didn't just show up here and move to Mountain Brook. Jewish immigration began in the late 1800s. And shortly after Birmingham was founded in 1876, and Jews, for the most part, tended to live on the north side of Birmingham. And, like all historical currents, things move forward, people migrate, they land in different places, they move into different neighborhoods. I see Jews today moving back inside the city. That's a big trend. So, yeah, that's a context as well. Number one, it's not true that all Jews live in Mountain Brook. But number two, that's a context as to why over the years, a significant number have lived in Mountain Brook.
So finally, I wanted to end with this and kind of, well, I guess I'll say, if somebody's watching this podcast, what are some ways that they can support the Jewish community?
Sure.
And I also say, I guess since you could be a spokesperson, to give them kind of, not spokesperson, but give them an open invite. Because like I told them, like when you invited me to the Levitt Community Center, I've drove by there for many years. One could think of perception that, oh, that's just for Jewish people. But you walk in there, it's really open for the community and everybody in the community.
Right.
Can go in there and learn. And I always tell people, and that's one of my reasons why I want to do this podcast, because I want people to have an open mind. Because I feel like when you have an open mind, you won't get so, I'm not going to say jaded, but you won't develop rigid viewpoints that's hard to change your viewpoints on things.
Sure.
Or thoughts.
Well, that's an excellent question for those who are interested in learning more about the Jewish community. They can contact the Birmingham Jewish Federation. They can contact the Jewish Community Center. They can contact any one of the temples. and simply, introduce yourself, say you heard about the Jewish community on Jarvis Escott's podcast. Richard Friedman spoke. You'd like to learn more about the community, the Alabama Holocaust Education Center. There are all sorts of Jewish institutions. In addition, I would be happy to interact, Zoom with people who are interested in learning more about the Jewish community. What I would ask is that they contact me through you, that they just reach out to you and say, hey, can you put me in touch with Richard Friedman? And you forward that to me, and we'll do that. We have a great community here that's made a tremendous difference in the history of Birmingham. And, the old saying, out of bad sometimes comes good. Well, regarding the issues we started talking about, the aftermath of the October 7th attacks, its aftermath, anti-Semitism, those are all terrible, terrible things. But what's the good is people have become very attuned and very interested and want to learn more and really say, well, hey, I need to better understand this. How can I lean into this? And another thing, and you can contact me through Jarvis, is that I am happy to come to any of your church groups, civic clubs, business settings, myself, one or two others, to do educational programming around the issues that we talked about today. Because at the end of the day, I've been in this community a long time. I grew up in New Jersey, but I've been here almost 50 years. My wife is from here. I love this community. There's so many things I love about Birmingham, and I want to be part of anything that creates deeper understanding among different people here, even if we have different points of view on some of the issues. That's the American tradition, as I said. If we have different points of view, presumably we don't kill each other. We listen to each other, and that's very important to me as well. So what I would ask is just contact Jarvis, and he will forward to me any inquiries or any overtures in terms if you'd like to connect, and I'd be happy to do that.
And also, everybody, on a lot of my podcasts, I always put website links and some phone numbers on there. So you'll see a couple of those on there as we're talking. We're doing like a record Zoom interview. But Richard, I want to personally thank you for taking time. Well, two people I want to thank. I want to thank my friend Stacy. When she sees this, she's probably going to, I already told her thank you. And I also want to thank you for, you didn't know me from, well, as much as a stranger in the street. I like to say we're friends now. And one of the things I definitely want to come to next time you all have a food festival at the community center, get some of the good Jewish food, that it's been very eye-opening to me and educational.
Sure.
One of the things I always tell people, you never stop learning. The minute you stop learning, that's when, not going to say you die literally physically, but you die mentally and can't understand how the world changes.
Right.
And I feel like in this day and time, like you said, sometimes our bad, good things happen. If something happens out of this, that it gets people together to start talking to each other.
Sure.
And also, like I was talking to you, I don't know where it leads. I do feel like something needs to be done even in the school systems, even locally here, to educate people about the history of it as well. Because a lot of times you'll grow up in this city for years. Like, for example, I go by the Brown March Tower. Never knew that the Brown March Tower was named off of some, Jewish person that lived here in Birmingham. Or if you went to UAB, everybody knows about the Oldman building.
Sure. Absolutely. So, yeah, one of the things I can do if there are educators out there and you're interested in developing a couple of lessons about the history of the Jewish community and its contributions to Birmingham, I can help you construct that and actually suggest one or two people pretty expert who come in and talk about all that. So yes, all those opportunities. And Jarvis, thank you to you. The work you do is amazing. The way you connect people, and both as a Birminghamian and a member of our Jewish community, particularly at this difficult time, I'm very, very grateful to you.
Well, I mean, I'm sincere to say, I think you like a friend.
You bet.
So, we met each other a short time, but like we say, my Jewish brother.
Good by me.
Yeah. So I think that, like I always say, me, and I want to do this podcast, me as an African American man talking to a Jewish man, that we are, like you said, we all are common allies. Because remember, the same people that hate me hate your people in some ways.
Right.
So everyone, I want to say thank you all for watching this podcast. And I'm probably going to do some more future subjects for the matter. So everybody stay tuned. Please check out what'shappenedbirmingham.com for more interviews. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And we got an audio version of this on Apple Podcasts. So thank you all for watching and have a great day, everybody. And last but not least, do visit the Levitt Jewish Community Center. You'll continue. Definitely open to all. So,
thank you, sir.
Thank you all and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the What's Happening Birmingham video podcast. Please check out our website, app, or subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest videos today.